The scent of expensive cigars and polished mahogany hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume of power and confinement within the Costello. Eleanor Vance sat at the long, gleaming dining table, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly on the cool linen tablecloth. Crystal chandeliers above cast a shimmering light on the faces of Dominic Moretti's associates, faces etched with a carefully cultivated deference. She watched the subtle shifts in their expressions, the way their eyes darted towards Dominic, seeking approval or anticipating a command. Each clink of silverware, every murmur of conversation, seemed to amplify the quiet hum of her own rising tension. Dominic, seated at the head of the table, held court with an effortless authority. His dark eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over his guests, settling for a brief, possessive moment on Eleanor. He spoke of business ventures, of territories, of the delicate balance of power that governed their world. Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze, a pressure that was both demanding and dismissive all at once. She picked at a sliver of roasted duck, the rich taste barely registering on her tongue. The conversation drifted to international markets, to the intricate dance of supply and demand, a field Eleanor knew well from her academic past. She cleared her throat softly, a flicker of her former self daring to surface. The emerging markets in Southeast Asia present an interesting paradox, she began, her voice measured and articulate. The political instability often overshadows the immense demographic potential, leading to undervalued assets for those willing to brave the risk. A few heads turned, a momentary silence falling over the table. She felt a brief surge of something akin to hope, a desire to engage in a genuine exchange of ideas. Dominic leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his lips. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "always with your fascinating theories. But I believe our guest would much rather hear about the exquisite vintage of the wine, or perhaps the delicate preparation of this marvelous soufflé." He gestured towards the attentive sommelier with a flick of his wrist. "After all, some matters are best left to the men of action, would you not agree?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread among the associates, a quick, almost practiced assent to Dominic's casual dismissal. Eleanor felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach, a burning sensation behind her eyes that she quickly suppressed. Her fingers locked around the stem of her wine glass, cold and fragile. She knew if she let go, she might shatter it. The wine, a deep crimson, swirled mockingly in the crystal, reflecting the chandelier's brilliance. She swallowed, the bitter taste now overwhelming the sweetness of the dessert wine. The conversation resumed, but the brief interruption had served its purpose. Eleanor understood her place. She was the elegant hostess, the beautiful ornament at Dominic's side, not a participant in the serious discussions that defined his empire. Her mind, once so vibrant with economic models and philosophical debates, felt like a caged bird, its wings clipped. She listened to the superficial chatter, the polite banalities, feeling an immense isolation settling around her like a shroud. She observed the faces around the table, studying the subtle cues. Mr. Rossi, usually boisterous, was unusually quiet tonight, his eyes constantly seeking Dominic's. Mrs. Bianchi, ever the gossip, spoke in hushed tones, her laughter a little too forced. The atmosphere, despite the lavish feast and flowing wine, was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable fear that permeated every corner of the grand dining hall. She noticed how a single glance from Dominic could silence an animated discussion, how a slight frown could send a shiver through the room. These men, powerful in their own right, existed in a state of constant apprehension under Dominic's unwavering gaze. She recognized the same fear in herself, buried deep beneath layers of composure. It was a fear that kept her silent, that forced her to swallow her intellect and her opinions. This ornate room with its priceless tapestries and gilded cornices felt less like a home and more like a beautifully constructed prison. Each antique portrait on the wall seemed to watch her, their painted eyes holding centuries of secrets and unspoken suffering. Later, as the last guest finally departed, their fawning goodbyes echoing through the marble foyer, Eleanor felt an immediate, profound exhaustion. She offered a polite, practiced smile to Dominic, a silent acknowledgement of the evening's performance. His eyes, devoid of warmth, merely flickered over her before he turned to issue instructions to his head of security. She knew her presence was no longer required. Her public role was over for the night. Without a word, she ascended the grand staircase, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the pretense she had maintained for hours. The air in the upper corridors was cooler, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. She bypassed her opulent bedroom, its heavy drapes and silk furnishings offering no true comfort. Instead, she walked down a dimly lit hallway, her hand reaching for the solid oak door of her private study. The study was her sanctuary, a stark contrast to the rest of the Castello. Here, the walls were lined not with ornate mirrors, but with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, overflowing with volumes on history, philosophy, and economic theory. The air smelled of old paper and leather, a comforting aroma that spoke of knowledge and quiet contemplation. She closed the heavy door behind her, the soft click a definitive separation from the world Dominic inhabited. She shed her evening gown, letting the heavy silk pool around her feet, and slipped into a soft cashmere robe. The chill of the room, far from being unwelcome, felt cleansing. She moved to her large mahogany desk, cluttered with stacks of papers and open books. Her fingers, still trembling, slightly from the evening's suppressed emotions, reached for a particular volume. It was a dense textbook on behavioral economics, its pages filled with complex equations and intricate theories. She sank into the worn leather armchair, the familiar weight of the book in her hands a soothing balm. The world outside, with its calculated conversations and veiled threats, faded into the background. Here, within these pages, her mind could breathe. She began to read, her eyes scanning the precise language, her intellect engaging with the concepts of market inefficiencies and cognitive biases. The numbers and graphs offered a clarity, a logic that was sorely lacking in her own life. She traced a complex curve on a diagram with her finger, a faint smile touching her lips. This was her true language, her true passion. It felt like coming home after a long, arduous journey. For these precious hours, she was not Dominic Moretti's wife, the elegant ornament. She was Eleanor Vance, the scholar, the thinker, the woman who once dreamed of shaping industries and influencing policy. The intellectual stimulation was a vital lifeline, a quiet act of rebellion against the suffocating sameness of her days. She had spent years cultivating this inner world, building it as an impenetrable fortress against the emptiness of her gilded cage. Every new concept absorbed, every intricate problem solved, was a small victory, a silent assertion of her own existence. The quiet hum of the night, broken only by the rustle of turning pages, was a peaceful counterpoint to the raucous dinner party she had just endured. She lost herself in the arguments of economists, finding a strange comfort in the rationality of their predictions, even when applied to irrational human behavior. Hours passed, marked only by the deepening shadows outside the window. The moon cast a pale silver light across her desk, illuminating the intricate formulas. She felt a profound sense of peace, a fragile happiness that only this solitary pursuit could offer. Her shoulders relaxed, the tension draining from her neck. She allowed herself to feel for a moment truly free. Her eyes, tired but bright with intellectual engagement, drifted towards the darkened window pane. She caught her own reflection in the glass, superimposed over the faint outline of the night outside. Her dark brown hair, once meticulously styled, was now slightly disheveled. Her hazel eyes, usually guarded and composed, held a raw, unguarded intensity. She saw not just the weariness, but a flicker of defiance in their depths, a silent promise to herself that this cannot last. Eleanor Vance saw a flicker in the darkened window, a defiant spark, a ghost of the woman she had been. This gilded cage would not hold her forever. The spark often ignited old memories, pulling her back to a cherished dream, a different lifetime. She closed her deep hazel eyes, and the estate's silence melted, replaced by a university campus's hopeful hum. The crisp autumn air carried scents of fallen leaves and coffee, mingling with student chatter. Eleanor, then 22, clutched a worn economics textbook. Her sharp mind buzzed with theories of global markets, a future she would shape with intellect and determination. She felt the rough texture of her tweed blazer, a shield against the chill of early mornings in the university library. That quiet sanctuary with its scent of aging paper was a haven for her restless mind. Professor Davies, kind but demanding, often told her, "Eleanor, your insights are exceptional. You possess a rare gift." His words were an affirmation of her true self. She spent hours dissecting market trends, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Her agile fingers, then unadorned by the cold sapphire, charted data, building arguments. Her intelligence was her greatest asset. She dreamed of influential boardrooms, of crafting economic policy. The freedom of independent thought, the rush of discovery, the satisfaction of mastering a concept, these were her youth's currencies. Every academic challenge was an opportunity to expand her understanding. She saw herself as an architect of ideas, a force in international finance. Her bright hazel eyes scanned numbers, transforming them into narratives of economic power. She had a confident voice then, debating and questioning. The future, shimmering with possibilities, stretched before her, a limitless horizon. She believed in merit, in hard work, in the power of an idea. A freshly printed report represented tangible progress, proof of her pursuit of knowledge. She earned her accomplishments through sheer intellectual will. The thought of being an accessory, a silent ornament, would have been anathema. Her purpose was clear, her path illuminated by ambition. The library's hum had been her world, where minds connected and potential seemed infinite. She recalled shared study sessions, feeling valued for her mind. The taste of ambition was sweet, a contrast to the bitter resignation at the Costello. That boundless freedom now felt like a crushing weight, a reminder of what she had lost. The comforting scent of old paper and youthful ambition faded abruptly, replaced by the heavy, cloying perfume of Dominic's study. Campus life dissolved into the quiet elegance of her opulent prison. The woman who navigated complex theories was now tasked with arranging flowers, selecting catering. Her nimble fingers, once charting markets, now held a delicate pen over a list of charities, a list that felt insignificant. This was her prescribed role, dictated by her controlling husband. The cold, heavy sapphire wedding ring reminded her of the intellectual life she had traded for this gilded cage. Eleanor sat poised across Dominic's desk, a research binder resting on the leather. His expensive cigar smoke hung thick, attempting to mask the fresh white roses. She had spent weeks researching charities for the annual gala, delving into financial transparency and community impact. Her proposals were strategic, designed to enhance the family's image and support worthy causes. She cleared her throat, her voice calm. "Dominic, I have thoroughly researched thoughts on the annual gala," she began, pushing the binder forward. "I've identified 3 organizations aligning with our profile. The local youth mentorship program, for instance, offers impactful community engagement." She waited, hoping for interest. Dominic leaned back in his leather chair, waving a dismissive hand. His dark eyes scanned a financial report on his tablet, not glancing at her presentation. The rustling of his papers mocked her efforts. Golden light caught dust motes, a cruel representation of her words' insignificance. "Eleanor, my dear, you worry too much about these trivial details," he stated, his voice smooth but edged with condescension. "Leave the heavy lifting to my people. Your role, darling, is more important. You provide the grace, the beauty, the hostessing that keeps everyone impressed." He looked up, a patronizing smile playing on his lips, never reaching his cold eyes. "Your appearance is the greatest contribution. Guests appreciate the dazzling spectacle, not the granular details. Just ensure the champagne is chilled, the caviar fresh, and the floral arrangements exquisite. That is where your true talent lies." A cold knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach. She felt the blood drain from her face but forced a neutral expression, a skill honed over countless dismissals. Her research suggestions, her hours of effort, had been reduced to an irrelevant trifle. The scent of his cologne, usually a marker of his presence, now felt suffocating. She felt the rough texture of the binder, a symbol of wasted effort. He saw her as an object, a decorative element. Her intellect was suppressed, deemed unsuitable for her station. Each instance chipped away at her spirit. Her jaw ached with the effort of holding back a retort. The silence after his words felt deafening, amplifying the insult. She swallowed, tasting the bitter tang of suppressed anger. The brutal truth of her gilded imprisonment hit her again. She was a prop, an accessory to reflect his glory. She quietly closed the binder, the soft thud echoing, a sound of defeat she vowed to erase. Her cold tea mirrored the glacial chill in her heart. Later that week, the chill deepened into a glacial dread. The Castello's elegance often hid a darker truth. Eleanor had learned to navigate its spaces, picking up whispers, discerning moods. One evening, a storm rattled the windows. She walked down a corridor near Dominic's private office, intending to retrieve a book. The muffled sound of his voice carried an unsettling, sharp edge she recognized. It was not his charming public voice, nor his dismissive tone for her. This was something colder, more dangerous, devoid of empathy. The faint smell of rain-soaked soil mingled with stale cigar smoke near his office door. Eleanor paused, her hand reaching for the doorknob, when a fragment of Dominic's conversation pierced the quiet. His low voice was devoid of warmth, a chilling command. "I don't care how he does it, Salvatore, just get it done. Make sure it's irreversible," he stated, his words clipped, laced with menace. "He has until sunrise. If the shipment isn't clear, then the message will be clear. Very clear." Eleanor's breath hitched. She froze, her trembling fingers touching the marble wall, straining to catch another word. The relentless rain against the glass intensified, a terrifying counterpoint to his brutal words. "No loose ends, Salvatore. This is an unequivocal directive," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a guttural whisper. "A man's reputation depends on keeping promises. Failing to deliver has severe consequences beyond a late payment." A brief, tense pause followed, filled only by the storm's fury. "Make an example of him. Let them all understand what happens when they cross me, and make absolutely certain it's untraceable. I want no ripples, no repercussions, no connections leading back to us. None whatsoever." Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. A sickening cold spread through her veins. She tasted a metallic, bitter tang, a surge of primal fear and disgust. This was the unvarnished Dominic, stripped of his veneer. The man who dismissed her intellect now orchestrated brutality, something that would end in profound suffering. His public persona was a lie. This chilling voice revealed the monstrous predator. The opulent carpets felt like a suffocating shroud. A wave of nausea washed over her. She knew intellectually the ruthless world Dominic inhabited, but to hear it so directly shattered any fragile illusions. The casual brutality in his tone, the disregard for human life, was horrifying. She imagined the message, the example, and a deep shiver ran down her spine. The elegant furnishings mocked her, complicit witnesses to the evil within. She felt a profound betrayal, not because she believed him a saint, but because she had hoped for a different life, one where her intelligence might be valued. The coldness radiating from her fingertips on the marble seeped into her bones. This stark revelation solidified the resentment simmering beneath her composed exterior. She had allowed herself to be lulled by comfort and power, but now saw the unspeakable cost. Her past self, the ambitious student, screamed in protest. The man she married had stolen her future and was actively destroying her present. The rain intensified, mirroring the storm within her. The house's quiet luxury felt like a suffocating blanket. She pulled her hand back sharply from the cold wall, a deep, unshakable chill settling in her soul. This final confirmation extinguished the last ember of affection. It transformed her resentment into hard resolve. She retreated silently, her footsteps barely audible. The overheard words replayed in her mind. The air in her chambers felt stifling. She walked to her towering window, looking at the rain-swept gardens, their beauty now sinister. The once bright promise of intellectual contribution felt annihilated. She pressed her lips into a grim line, her hands clenching until her knuckles turned white. A crushing weariness settled over her. The immense weight of her opulent captivity pressed down. Every dream, every aspiration had been ruthlessly stripped away, replaced by his insidious control. A deep, burning resentment, cold and steady, ignited within her. It was a flame she knew would never be extinguished, not while the man who stole her future continued to dictate her existence. She clenched her jaw, the weight of her reality settling, feeling a growing resentment towards the man who stole her future. The resentment Eleanor felt had begun to curdle into something colder, something more deliberate. Her days, once filled with a semblance of structured autonomy, now felt increasingly confined. The first subtle cuts came in the form of administrative edicts delivered through Dominic's sharp-suited assistants. Each pronouncement chipped away at another small corner of her world. Her morning appointments, once a tapestry of charity board meetings and art gallery openings, suddenly became subject to Dominic's personal approval. The assistant, a man named Thomas with perpetually damp palms, would inform her with a practiced, regretful tone that the Red Cross Gala was no longer a priority, or that her membership to the Historical Preservation Society had been gracefully declined on her behalf. Eleanor would listen, her posture perfectly straight, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers as she gripped the porcelain teacup. She understood the unspoken message. Dominic was systematically isolating her, severing her connections to the world outside his gilded cage. The expenditures followed soon after. Her personal accounts, once generously funded, now required detailed justification for even the most mundane purchases. A new set of books for her private library, a silk scarf she admired in a boutique window, even the ingredients for a complex recipe she wished to try for dinner. All were scrutinized. Dominic's personal secretary, a severe woman with spectacles perched on her nose, would return her requests with red-penciled notations, often accompanied by a condescending email from Dominic himself. He would write, "Darling, I believe your tastes are becoming a touch extravagant. We must be fiscally responsible, especially in these uncertain times." Eleanor knew these were not uncertain times for Dominic. His empire was expanding, his coffers overflowing. The restrictions were arbitrary, a deliberate exercise in control designed to remind her of her complete dependence. She felt the heavy weight of his ways even when he was not physically present, a surveillance that extended to her thoughts, her desires. Her private study, once a sanctuary, now felt like another room in her prison. The scent of old books and polished wood, once comforting, now seemed to carry a faint, metallic tang of iron bars. She could almost hear the rustle of the security cameras, the faint hum of monitoring devices, though she knew they were not there. It was the crushing certainty of being watched, of having every move anticipated, encountered, that truly suffocated her. The air in the Castello grew heavier, thick with unspoken rules and veiled threats. Each denied request, each canceled engagement, tightened the invisible noose around her neck. She began to measure her breaths, to filter her words, even in the quiet solitude of her own thoughts. She felt like a beautiful bird in a golden cage, its wings meticulously clipped, its songs stifled before they could even reach its throat. The silence that fell over her private moments was profound, broken only by the rhythmic thud of her own heart against her ribs, a constant, urgent drumming. A few weeks later, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne. The Moretti estate buzzed with the low hum of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes. Dominic was hosting a gathering for influential figures from politics and business, a display of his ever-growing power. Eleanor moved through the opulent ballroom, a vision of composure in a deep emerald gown, her smile fixed, polite, and entirely empty. She nodded, she listened, she offered precisely the right amount of polite interest, her mind a whirling vortex of observations. She noted the subtle power dynamics, the alliances forming and dissolving in hushed whispers, the avarice in many of the attendees' eyes. The political discussion began innocently enough, a debate about international trade agreements. Eleanor found herself drawn into a small circle near the grand fireplace, listening as a well-known senator passionately argued a point about tariffs. Eleanor, with her background in economics and international relations, felt an old intellectual spark ignite within her. She offered a concise, well-reasoned counterpoint, citing a specific economic theory and recent market trends. Her voice was calm, articulate, and carried a quiet authority. The senator paused, genuinely intrigued, his brow furrowed in thought. A few others in the circle turned their attention towards her, their expressions shifting from polite indifference to genuine interest. Then Dominic's voice cut through the air, sharp and resonant, like a discordant note in a symphony. "Eleanor, darling," he said, his tone dripping with mock affection, "while your passion for such matters is admirable, I believe you're overlooking a crucial element." He stepped into the circle, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the elegant marble floor. His hand came to rest lightly on her back, a possessive gesture that felt less like an embrace and more like a brand. Eleanor felt an immediate, involuntary tightening in her stomach. The warmth of his hand radiated through the silk of her gown, but it carried an icy chill to her spirit. He then proceeded to dismantle her argument, not with superior logic, but with a dismissive wave of his hand and a series of vague, sweeping statements about real-world applications and practical considerations that completely ignored the substance of her points. He spoke over her, interrupting her attempts to clarify, his gaze fixed on the senator, as if Eleanor herself were invisible. "My wife, you see, has a tendency to get lost in her books," Dominic chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "The theoretical can be quite intoxicating, but the reality, my dear," he said, turning to her with a condescending smile that did not reach his eyes, "is far more nuanced, isn't it?" The senator, sensing the shift in power, quickly adopted a conciliatory tone, nodding along with Dominic's assertions. The others in the circle averted their gazes, a palpable awkwardness settling over the group. Eleanor felt a hot flush creep up her neck, her cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and fury. Her heart pounded, a frantic bird trapped within her ribs. She tightened her jaw, forcing her lips into a faint, serene smile, a mask designed to hide the profound humiliation that coursed through her veins. She felt small, foolish, utterly diminished. The scent of lilies, once fragrant, now seemed cloying, suffocating. The polished gleam of the senator's cufflinks, the diamond on a woman's finger, the intricate pattern of the Persian rug beneath her feet, all these details sharpened into agonizing focus, as if her heightened awareness were a curse. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to expose the sheer intellectual void behind Dominic's bluster. But she remained silent, her composure a fragile shield against the onslaught of his public belittling. Every polite nod from the guests, every averted glance, every superficial compliment Dominic directed her way afterwards, felt like another stone added to the burden on her chest. The music, once a soft background hum, now seeming to mock her, its cheerful melody a stark contrast to the internal storm raging within her. Later, as the evening wore on and the crowd thinned slightly, Eleanor found herself near the buffet table, picking absently at a canapé. Her appetite had vanished, replaced by a hollow ache in her stomach. The lingering taste of expensive wine felt acrid on her tongue. She overheard fragments of conversation, laughter, the clink of ice in glasses, all of it a dull roar that failed to penetrate the thick veil of her despair. She felt a gentle touch on her arm. Maria, the long-term housekeeper, stood beside her, her gaze soft and sympathetic. Maria had been with the Moretti family for decades, witnessing countless gatherings, countless displays of Dominic's particular brand of control. Her presence was a comforting anchor in Eleanor's tumultuous world. Maria offered her a fresh napkin, her movements quiet and efficient. Their eyes met, a brief, silent exchange that spoke volumes. In Maria's weathered face, Eleanor saw a profound understanding, a shared history of unspoken truths. There was no pity in Maria's gaze, but rather a deep, knowing empathy. It was a glance that acknowledged the intricate dance of power and submission that played out in this house every day. A silent acknowledgement of Eleanor's pain, and perhaps a silent affirmation of her strength. Maria's eyes held a subtle glint, a flicker of something ancient and wise, a knowledge that storms, however fierce, eventually pass. Eleanor offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a gratitude that words could not convey. The brief connection was a lifeline, a reminder that she was not entirely alone in this desolate landscape. The scent of lemon polish, faint on Maria's uniform, was suddenly a grounding aroma, a familiar comfort. Maria squeezed her arm gently, a fleeting gesture of solidarity, before turning to attend to another guest, melting back into the background of white-gloved staff. The warmth of Maria's touch lingered on Eleanor's arm, a small ember of hope in the cold expanse of her isolation. It was a fleeting moment, a breath of air in a suffocating room, but it was enough to remind Eleanor that some bonds, forged in empathy, could transcend the walls Dominic had so carefully constructed. The party finally began to wind down, guests slowly departing, their goodbyes echoing hollowly in the grand entrance hall. Dominic, his face flushed with success and fine liquor, bid them farewell with boisterous charm, his arm draped possessively around a political ally. Eleanor offered her own polite farewells, her voice steady, her smile unwavering. She felt utterly drained, the effort of maintaining her facade having consumed every last ounce of her energy. The quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed to mock the frantic beating of her heart. As the last car pulled away, leaving only the distant sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the vast gardens, Eleanor retreated to the sanctuary of her bedroom. The opulent space, with its silk drapes and antique furniture, usually offered a sense of calm, but tonight it felt cold, cavernous. She dismissed her maid with a soft word, craving absolute solitude. The heavy silence enveloped her, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the evening. She unzipped her emerald gown, letting it fall in a shimmering pool at her feet, a discarded skin. The cool air against her bare shoulders offered a small reprieve, but the burning sensation on her cheeks still lingered. She walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. The moon hung like a silver coin in the inky sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the sprawling gardens. The vastness of the estate, once a symbol of prestige, now felt like an endless prison yard. She ran a hand over her bare arm, feeling the goosebumps rise on her skin. The chill was not just from the night air, it permeated her very soul. Her gaze fell upon her left hand, illuminated by the pale moonlight. The sapphire wedding ring glittered, a heavy, intricate piece of platinum and deep blue stone. It was a masterpiece of jewelry, a testament to Dominic's wealth and his desire for outward display. But to Eleanor, it had become a tangible symbol of her captivity. She raised her hand, turning the ring so the sapphire caught the light, revealing its mesmerizing depth, its cold, unyielding brilliance. The stone felt like an anchor, dragging her down into the abyss of her marriage. Her fingers traced the sharp facets of the sapphire, then the smooth, cool platinum band. Each curve, each diamond set into the metal, represented another link in the chain that bound her to Dominic, to this life, to this unbearable fate. The weight of it, normally a comforting presence, now felt crushing, suffocating. It was not just metal and stone, it was the weight of expectations, the weight of reputation, the weight of Dominic's absolute control. She felt the pulse throb faintly beneath the sapphire, a tiny, defiant beat against the cold, unyielding rock. Alone in her bedroom, she traced the intricate sapphire on her wedding ring, feeling its heavy weight like shackles binding her to an unbearable fate. The scent of expensive Cuban tobacco hung heavy in the air, a familiar shroud over the hushed discussion in Dominic's private study. Eleanor stood near the tall, leaded glass window, ostensibly admiring the view of the city lights shimmering below. But every nerve ending was tuned to the low rumble of voices behind her. The room itself felt like a cage woven from old money and dark secrets. Heavy velvet drapes absorbed sound, and the gleam of polished mahogany reflected the dim light from a single antique lamp. She could almost taste the fear mixed with deference from the men seated before Dominic. Dominic's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and dismissive. Marcus Thorne is a nuisance, nothing more. A pretentious upstart playing at being a king. He chuckled, a short, humorless sound that brought a cold knot to Eleanor's stomach. His operations are flimsy, built on a house of cards. He lacks the foundation, the true grit. A clink of ice in a glass, a murmur of agreement from one of his men. Eleanor felt a familiar tremor of resentment. Dominic always spoke with such absolute conviction, as if his words alone could shape reality. He believed his will was law, his judgment infallible. She heard him outline details of an upcoming negotiation, a territory dispute involving some docks on the city's industrial edge. Thorne thinks he can muscle in, Dominic continued, his tone laced with contempt. He thinks his little nightclub and his fancy suits make him untouchable. He will learn otherwise. Eleanor imagined the man, Thorn, whom Dominic spoke of with such disdain. She had heard the name before, in passing, a rival always lurking at the periphery of Dominic's world. Dominic saw him as a temporary irritant, a fly to be swatted. Eleanor, however, felt a different kind of curiosity stir within her. This dismissed rival might hold a key, a crack in Dominic's seemingly impregnable fortress. The discussion continued, a slow, predatory dissection of Thorne's weaknesses, as identified by Dominic. Eleanor listened, her face expressionless, her gaze fixed on the distant, glittering skyline. She noticed Dominic's men nodding, their faces mirroring his confident sneer. They were creatures of his making, reflections of his power. She could feel the chill radiating from Dominic, a cold, calculating intensity that could freeze anyone who dared to question him. The rich aroma of leather from the chairs, the faint metallic tang of old coins in the air, the distant wail of a siren, all blended into the oppressive atmosphere of the room. It was a place where futures were decided and lives, perhaps, were quietly erased. Later that evening, the heavy sapphire ring felt like a lead weight on her finger as Eleanor retreated to her private study. The room, her sanctuary, offered a momentary reprieve from Dominic's suffocating presence. She ran a hand over the spines of her untouched books, each one a whisper of the life she once knew, the person she used to be. The gentle hum of her laptop was a small comfort, a quiet companion in her solitude. She brewed a cup of herbal tea, its steam warming her chilled fingers. The faint scent of chamomile, a stark contrast to the tobacco that clung to her clothes from the study. Eleanor sat at her desk, her mind alight with a new purpose. Dominic's casual dismissal of Marcus Thorne had ignited something in her, not sympathy for the man, but a strategic spark. An enemy of Dominic was, by extension, a potential point of leverage. She knew Dominic's world was built on information, and she possessed a different kind of network. One Dominic had long since forgotten she cultivated, her old university contacts. These were not the men who bent to Dominic's will, but academics, researchers, people who understood the delicate dance of data and influence. She began her subtle inquiry. She drafted careful emails, innocuous at first glance, mentioning a casual interest in regional economic developments, property trends, and the shifting landscape of local business. She knew how to phrase questions, how to extract information without raising suspicion. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, a familiar rhythm from her academic days. This was not the idle chatter of socialites. This was intellectual pursuit, sharp and precise. She could feel the familiar thrill of research, the satisfaction of piecing together fragments of data into a coherent picture. One contact, a former classmate named Julian, now a professor of urban economics, responded with a surprising depth of detail about Thorne's business ventures. He mentioned the Velvet Shadow, Thorne's exclusive club, describing it as a legitimate front for a surprisingly diverse portfolio of investments. Julian described Thorne as shrewd, innovative, and possessing a knack for identifying undervalued assets, a stark contrast to Dominic's brute force approach. Eleanor absorbed every word, her hazel eyes scanning the text, searching for patterns, for vulnerabilities, for strengths. The smell of ink and old paper from a reference book she'd pulled from the shelf mingled with the faint, sweet scent of her tea. Another contact, Sarah, who worked in financial intelligence, provided insights into Thorne's reputation, hinting at a careful, almost academic approach to his illicit dealings. He was not prone to overt displays of violence, she implied, preferring to outmaneuver rather than overpower. He seemed to value intellect, a subtle detail that resonated with Eleanor. She found herself increasingly intrigued not by the man himself, but by the alternative he represented. The world he inhabited was still dangerous, certainly, but it seemed to operate on different rules, a different currency than Dominic's crude power. Hours passed. The city outside her window grew quiet, its vibrant hum slowly fading. Eleanor felt a quiet surge of energy, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. This intellectual chess game was a stark reminder of her own capabilities Dominic had systematically suppressed. She felt the weight of the sapphire ring on her finger, but for the first time it didn't feel quite so heavy. It was still a symbol of her gilded cage, but now she was actively looking for the lock, for the weakness in its design. The cool night air slipped through a tiny crack in the window, a small, chilling reminder of the cold world she lived in. But her mind felt warm, ignited by the pursuit of knowledge. A few weeks later, the air in the opulent ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, scattering light across polished marble floors where the city's elite mingled. It was a charity auction, one of countless social obligations Eleanor attended at Dominic's side. The murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet formed a sophisticated backdrop to a tedious evening. Eleanor moved through the crowd, a perfect hostess, her smile fixed, her posture impeccable. She offered polite courtesies, her mind, however, drifting far from the small talk. Dominic was holding court near a display of antique jewelry, his booming laugh periodically cutting through the refined chatter. Eleanor felt a familiar sense of detachment, observing him as if from a great distance. He was in his element, radiating power and charm, a performance she knew intimately. She tasted the dry champagne on her tongue, its fizz doing little to lift her spirits. The weight of her gown, its exquisite silk, a barrier between her and the world, felt almost suffocating. Her hazel eyes, however, were sharp, observant, constantly cataloging the faces, the gestures, the unspoken interactions around her. Then, she saw him. He stood across the vast room near a large painting being prepared for auction. Marcus Thorne. He was taller than she had imagined, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that seemed to miss nothing. His dark, slightly wavy hair was impeccably styled, and his tailored suit, a rich charcoal gray, spoke of understated power. He wasn't loud like Dominic, not commanding attention with boisterous laughter. Instead, he possessed a quiet charisma, a magnetic stillness that drew the eye without demanding it. He was speaking to a small group, a subtle, knowing smirk playing on his lips, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Eleanor felt a jolt, a sudden, unexpected tightening in her chest. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was recognition, perhaps, of a different kind of strength, a different kind of presence. The air around her seemed to thicken, the sounds of the party receding into a distant hum. Her fingers, resting lightly on the cool, smooth fabric of her clutch bag, tightened almost imperceptibly. The scent of lilies, once cloying, now seemed sharper, more potent. As if sensing her gaze, Marcus Thorne slowly turned his head. His eyes, dark and piercing, found hers across the crowded ballroom. For a long, suspended moment, their gazes locked. It was an unexpected intensity, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them, a wordless conversation amidst the din. There was no judgment in his eyes, no overt aggression, only a deep, penetrating curiosity. It was a look that saw her, not Dominic's wife, not a mere ornament, but Eleanor Vance, a woman with thoughts and secrets. Eleanor felt her heart give a strange, unfamiliar flutter, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. It was a tremor of connection, of mutual awareness that cut through the superficiality of the evening. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a reaction she hadn't expected, and she quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks suddenly warm. The moment was fleeting, a mere fraction of time, but it left an imprint. She tried to regain her composure, taking a slow, steadying breath. She heard Dominic's laughter again, closer this time, and the spell was broken. But the image of Marcus Thorne's eyes, that sharp, discerning gaze, lingered in her mind. It was a challenge, yes, but also something more. It was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a recognition that went deeper than the polite smiles and empty pleasantries of her world. Eleanor found herself unexpectedly pondering that brief, intense gaze from Marcus Thorne, a flicker of something she hasn't felt in years. Recognition, perhaps, or a challenge. The lingering impression of Marcus Thorne stayed with Eleanor, a subtle shift in the air after his brief, intense gaze. It felt like a tiny fissure had appeared in the rigid wall of her existence. That fleeting moment, a challenge unspoken, resonated in the quiet corners of her mind, a counterpoint to the suffocating predictability of her days. She remembered the sharp intelligence in his eyes, a quality so rarely encountered in Dominic's world where deference often masked dullness. The respite from the usual routine, however, was short-lived. A sudden, almost frantic energy now gripped the Costello. Her birthday, usually a quiet affair acknowledged with a perfunctory gift and a formal dinner, was transforming into an elaborate spectacle. Dominic, with a flourish that announced his undisputed authority, declared his intention to host a lavish celebration. The mansion, usually a monument to controlled opulence, began to hum with a new orchestrated fervor. Eleanor watched the preparations unfold from a detached distance, observing the flurry of activity with a quiet, analytical eye. Event planners, florists, chefs, and countless household staff moved through the gilded halls like worker bees, each performing their assigned task with practiced precision. The air, usually heavy with the scent of aged leather and polished wood, now carried the sweet, cloying fragrance of exotic flowers and the faint aroma of expensive cleaning products. Dominic's voice, clear and resonant, often cut through the murmurs of instruction, dictating every minuscule detail. He oversaw the guest list with the precision of a general planning a campaign, scrutinizing each name, weighing its political or social value. The menu, a sprawling list of gourmet delicacies, was chosen not for taste, but for its impressive complexity and rarity. Even the style of music, an orchestral ensemble, was meticulously selected to project an image of timeless sophistication. Eleanor felt a familiar weariness settle over her. This grand gesture, masquerading as a celebration of her life, was nothing more than another meticulously crafted display of Dominic's power and wealth. She was merely the central ornament, a beautifully dressed doll positioned for public admiration. Her actual preferences, her tastes, her very being were irrelevant in this grand performance. It was a birthday not for her, but for him. She was keenly aware of the irony, the chilling paradox of such an extravagant display of affection devoid of any genuine warmth. One morning, a small, unassuming envelope appeared on her antique writing desk. It lay amongst the usual stack of invitations and social correspondence, its plain cream paper and unadorned script a stark contrast to the embossed monograms and elaborate calligraphy surrounding it. There was no return address, only her name, Eleanor Vance, written in an elegant, unfamiliar hand. Her heart gave a peculiar thump. Anonymous messages were rare in her carefully controlled existence. She picked it up, the paper feeling cool and thin between her fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper held a short typewritten message. It contained a string of numbers and a few obscure financial terms. Project Chimera, Q3 projections, discrepancy in offshore accounts, 212-789 XX, reference Blue Orchid acquisition. Her brow furrowed. Project Chimera was an old, ambitious, and ultimately failed venture from her university days, a complex economic model she had developed with a peer. The numbers meant nothing immediately, but the terms and the reference to an acquisition hinted at something deeply technical. This was clearly from an academic contact, someone who knew her past work, someone who understood how to pique her intellect. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her hand. This was not a social note. This was a riddle. She reread the message, her mind instantly shifting into analytical mode. The cold detachment she usually reserved for Dominic's business reports now ignited with a spark of genuine curiosity. Blue Orchid was not a common phrase. It could be a code name, a specific type of investment, or even a literal product. The combination of offshore accounts and Q3 projections suggested illicit financial activity. Her fingers lightly traced the numbers, committing them to memory. This was a direct, albeit cryptic, whisper of vulnerability, an Achilles heel in Dominic's carefully constructed financial empire. The message offered no solution, no path, just a hint, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of her discontent. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it into the hidden compartment of her jewelry box. A new, dangerous thread had just woven itself into the fabric of her life. Days later, the full force of Dominic's dictatorial approach to her birthday reached a new peak. The floral arrangements were being finalized, an army of florists moving through the main ballroom. Towering displays of lilies, roses, and hydrangeas, all in various shades of white and cream, dominated the space, their scent almost overwhelming. Eleanor found herself, for a rare moment, walking among them, considering the vast expense, the deliberate uniformity. She saw a small cluster of delicate, deep violet heliotropes in a side room, a flower she had always admired for its subtle fragrance and unassuming beauty. They were almost hidden, destined for a smaller, less prominent display. A sudden, uncharacteristic impulse seized her. She approached Dominic, who was meticulously reviewing a seating chart, his face a mask of intense concentration. Dominic, she began softly, her voice barely audible above the rustle of paper and the distant murmur of the florists. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. Yes, Eleanor. His tone was already dismissive. I was just looking at the heliotropes, she continued, gesturing vaguely toward the side room. They are quite beautiful, perhaps a few small arrangements of them, interspersed among the larger displays. They would offer a lovely contrast. She knew it was a trivial request, almost insignificant, but it was her preference, a tiny assertion of self in a world where her choices were non-existent. It was an olive branch, perhaps, a small attempt to imbue the celebration with a trace of her own personality. Dominic's expression softened, but not with agreement. Instead, a patronizing smile spread slowly across his lips, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was the same smile he reserved for a child making an impractical suggestion or a pet attempting a trick. My dear Eleanor, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth, you know nothing of grand floral designs. White, cream, and gold are the colors of elegance, of sophistication. These purple flowers, while charming perhaps for a garden party, simply do not fit the aesthetic we are cultivating for such an important occasion. He paused, allowing his words to sink in, his gaze unwavering. This event must be flawless, a testament to our standing. We cannot dilute its impact with whimsy. He turned back to his seating chart, effectively ending the conversation. He then called over one of the head florists, issuing a command in hushed tones about relocating the offending heliotropes to the staff entrance, out of sight. Eleanor felt a familiar hot flush rise in her cheeks, quickly followed by a cold, numbing sensation. Her small attempt at input had been not just rejected, but ridiculed, dismissed as childish and unsophisticated. The sting was immediate, but deeper. Beneath the surface, a slow-burning fury began to coalesce. It was not just about the flowers, it was about the utter disregard for her perspective, her taste, her very existence as an individual. She was a decorative object, a silent partner, expected to simply exist and admire the gilded cage Dominic had built around them. She walked away from the ballroom, the heavy scent of lilies now feeling oppressive, suffocating. The meticulous preparations, the grand scale of the event, all now seemed sinister. The anonymous message, with its hint of Dominic's hidden vulnerabilities, suddenly gained a new, urgent significance. She was not just a prisoner. She was an intelligent, capable woman being deliberately, systematically erased. The thought was a bitter pill, but also a catalyst. The days leading up to the birthday party were a blur of final arrangements, fittings for a new gown she had no say in, and forced smiles for early arrivals. The house, usually a quiet echo chamber of her own thoughts, now thrummed with nervous energy. Every passing servant, every new delivery of champagne or caviar amplified the artificiality of the impending celebration. The grand event, meant to honor her, felt instead like a final elaborate constriction of her freedom, a public declaration of Dominic's absolute dominion. Her heart beat with a strange, heavy rhythm, a drum of anxiety and suppressed rage. She caught glimpses of herself in the polished mirrors, a woman exquisitely dressed, her face composed, but her eyes held a haunted quality. The sparkle of the sapphire on her ring finger, usually a reminder of her entrapment, now seemed to pulse with a dark, foreboding light. She was about to step onto a stage where she was merely a prop, and the knowledge weighed heavily on her. A chill ran down her spine, a premonition of something terrible and irreversible about to unfold on her supposed special day, a premonition she cannot shake. The air inside the Castello shimmered with the heat of 1,000 ambitions. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors, reflecting the expensive fabrics and polished chute of the city's elite. A low hum of cultured conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter, filled the vast ballroom, a carefully orchestrated symphony of power and pretense. Eleanor stood beside Dominic, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a picture of serene elegance in her sapphire gown. Every smile felt like an exertion, every polite nod a tiny internal battle. The scent of white lilies, her favorite, mingled with the heavy perfume of the women and the sharp, clean aftershave of the men, creating a dizzying, almost suffocating aroma. Her hazel eyes, usually so keen, moved across the room with a practiced, distant grace, observing without truly engaging. She felt the weight of her sapphire wedding ring, a cold pressure against her skin, a constant reminder of the gilded cage that surrounded her. The premonition from days ago, that icy dread, had settled deep within her chest. It was a cold, hard stone beneath her ribs, making each breath feel shallow. She could taste the expensive champagne on her tongue, dry and metallic, offering no comfort. The warmth of the room seemed artificial, failing to reach the chill that permeated her very bones. Dominic, meanwhile, basked in the attention, his charisma a magnetic force drawing every eye. He moved with an effortless authority, his dark suit a stark contrast to the glittering tableau around him. His words, when he spoke, were soft but carried an undeniable weight, silencing lesser conversations. Eleanor watched him, a familiar knot of resentment tightening in her stomach. He was the master of this domain, the orchestrator of every grand illusion, including the one that painted their marriage as a partnership. She smoothed the silk of her gown, a subtle gesture to ground herself, to remind herself of the fragile composure she was determined to maintain. Later, as the orchestra swelled, Dominic took a microphone, the polished silver gleaming under the spotlight. A hush fell over the room, an expectant silence. His voice, deep and resonant, commanded attention. He began his toast, his eyes sweeping across the assembled faces before finally resting on Eleanor. "To Eleanor," he announced, his words ringing out with a carefully calibrated warmth. "My beautiful wife, the very heart of this home, whose grace and elegance illuminate every occasion." Eleanor felt a faint blush creep up her neck, a purely automatic response. Her smile remained fixed, an echo of the one she had practiced in the mirror countless times. Inside, his words felt like empty vessels, clanging hollowly against the hard stone in her chest. Grace and elegance. He praised her as if she were a prized possession, a decorative object perfectly suited to his opulent backdrop, rather than a woman with a mind, with desires, with a soul that yearned to break free. She could hear the faint, polite murmuring of agreement from the guests, their eyes flickering from him to her, gauging her reaction. The taste of champagne in her mouth suddenly turned bitter. He continued, his gaze still on her, a possessive glint in his dark eyes. "She brings light to my life, order to my world, an impeccable taste to all that we do." The irony was a sharp, internal jab. He had systematically stripped her of all agency, controlled her every move, dictated her every preference, and now he lauded her for her taste. The gold embroidered on the tablecloth, the intricate patterns on the antique vases, the very flowers scenting the air, all chosen by him, imposed on her. The only thing she had chosen for herself, her intellectual pursuits, he had long dismissed as quaint eccentricities. She felt a cold anger begin to simmer beneath her composed exterior, a familiar heat that she had learned to suppress, to channel into a quiet, burning resolve. Just as Dominic's toast reached its superficial crescendo, a sudden stir at the grand entrance caught Eleanor's eye. A ripple went through the crowd, a collective turning of heads, and a subtle shift in the conversation's pitch. A new figure had entered, drawing every gaze like a moth to a flame. She was stunningly beautiful, with long, flowing blonde hair that cascaded around her shoulders and striking blue eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the subdued lighting. Her dress, a daring scarlet, clung to her figure, a stark, vibrant contrast to the more subdued elegance of the other women. Eleanor felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, despite the crowded warmth of the room. Her breath caught, a silent gasp. This was not the kind of arrival that usually happened at Dominic's meticulously planned events. This was an entrance designed to command attention, to disrupt the established order. She saw Dominic's eyes, which had just been fixed on her with a feigned affection, subtly flicker towards the new arrival. It was a glance at first, fleeting, but then it lingered. A fraction of a second, too long. A possessive quality entered his gaze, one Eleanor knew intimately, one that always preceded his claim on something new, something he desired to own. Her stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot forming deep inside. The premonition, the one she could not shake, suddenly made terrible sense. This was it. This was the moment she had unknowingly braced herself for. The blonde woman, Serafina, moved through the room with an almost insolent confidence, her blue eyes scanning the faces, seemingly searching for someone. Eleanor watched, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing a scene in a play, an inevitable tragedy unfolding before her. The jazz music, once a soothing backdrop, now seemed to mock her, its playful notes echoing her growing dread. Dominic's attention had fully shifted. His eyes, dark and sharp, followed Serafina's every move. There was a hunger in his gaze, an open, unapologetic desire that made Eleanor's blood run cold. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he lowered the microphone, a raw, primal reaction that he rarely allowed to show in public. The air around them, usually thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne, now felt charged, heavy with an unspoken tension. Eleanor's throat felt dry, a sudden parched sensation. She wanted to look away, to turn her head, but her gaze was locked, unwillingly drawn to the unfolding scene. Serafina finally met Dominic's eyes across the crowded floor. A slow, knowing smile played on her lips, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them, a shared secret. Eleanor saw it, felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the collective awareness of the other guests as they too began to notice the undeniable connection. A wave of nausea washed over her. This was not merely a glance, not a fleeting attraction. This was deliberate. This was planned. It was a calculated affront, meticulously staged for her public humiliation. The shock hit her with physical force, a blow to the solar plexus. Her vision blurred for a split second, the glittering lights of the chandeliers momentarily merging into a painful halo. She gripped the stem of her champagne flute, her fingers locking around the cold glass. If she let go, she knew she would drop it, shattering the delicate crystal, shattering her composure. The thought horrified her. She could not, would not allow herself to break here. Not now, not in front of all these eager eyes. Her chin lifted almost imperceptibly, a stubborn reflex of pride and defiance. Dominic, still holding the microphone, his eyes never leaving Serafina, suddenly leaned closer to Eleanor. His voice was a low murmur, barely audible above the music, but it cut through the din with chilling clarity. "Please excuse me, my dear," he said, a faint, almost cruel smile touching his lips. "I see a guest who requires my immediate attention." He spoke as if this were a trivial matter, a momentary distraction from the evening's festivities, a simple courtesy. Eleanor's breath hitched. His words, though quiet, resonated with a terrible finality. They were not a request, but a dismissal, a public, undeniable dismissal. Her mind raced, a jumble of emotions swirling within her. Disbelief, a searing pain, but also a rising, icy fury. The elegance she had so carefully curated, the composure she had so fiercely maintained, felt like a thin veil ready to be torn away. She could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her, the sudden quietening of nearby conversations, the sly, speculative glances. Everyone knew. They had all been waiting. He did not wait for her reply, did not even spare her another glance. With a fluid, confident motion, Dominic Moretti gently removed his arm from hers, the brief contact leaving a phantom chill on her skin. He placed the microphone on a nearby table, the soft clink echoing like a gunshot in Eleanor's ears. Then he turned. He walked purposefully, his stride unhurried, across the polished ballroom floor. Every step was deliberate, a public declaration. He moved directly towards the beautiful stranger, Serafina, leaving Eleanor standing alone, frozen mid-smile, a knot tightening in her stomach, heavy and cold as stone. The grand ballroom hummed with a sudden, anticipatory silence. Eleanor watched Dominic stride back across the polished marble, Serafina clinging to his arm. The new woman wore a dress of shimmering emerald, cut to accentuate every curve, her blonde hair a cascade of light. Her laughter, bright and unrestrained, pierced the elegant murmur of the crowd. Eleanor felt a cold dread settle deep in her bones. This was not merely a display. This was an announcement, sharp and deliberate, meant for all eyes. Each step Dominic took with Serafina was a hammer blow to Eleanor's carefully constructed composure. She felt the weight of every gaze, the hushed whispers that followed their progress, the turning heads of the city's elite. Her fingers locked around the stem of her champagne flute, the delicate glass feeling fragile yet rigid in her grasp. She could not let it shatter. Not now, not here. Dominic reached the very center of the room, drawing all attention. He stopped beneath the grand chandelier, its crystal facets shimmering above his dark head. He placed a hand on Serafina's waist, his touch possessive, undeniable. A ripple of nervous excitement, perhaps even shock, moved through the gathered guests. No one dared to look directly at Eleanor, yet she felt their peripheral awareness, their shared understanding of the unfolding drama. Her breath caught in her throat, a tight knot forming with each beat of her heart. She imagined her face was a canvas, painted with a serene smile, a perfect mask of indifference. Inside, a tempest raged. "My dear friends," Dominic's voice boomed, rich and confident, amplified by the sudden hush. "Tonight is indeed a special occasion." His eyes swept over the crowd, lingering for a fraction of a second on Eleanor before dismissively moving on. "We celebrate Eleanor's birthday, of course, and I thank you all for coming." The words felt like a cruel formality, a preamble to the true spectacle. Eleanor registered the faint scent of gardenia, a reminder of the elaborate floral arrangements she had despised, but Dominic had insisted upon. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. Then Dominic turned fully towards Serafina, his smile widening, his gaze softening in a way Eleanor had not seen directed at her in years. "But tonight I also have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to a truly remarkable woman." He paused, allowing the anticipation to build, a master of timing. "Please allow me to introduce Serafina, a very special guest. She brings such vivacity to our lives." His emphasis on vivacity was a thinly veiled jab, a word chosen specifically to contrast with Eleanor's perceived intellectualism. Eleanor felt a sharp, icy pang in her chest. She remembered Dominic's past complaints about her quiet nature, her preference for books over superficial chatter. Now he weaponized those observations. Serafina beamed, her blue eyes sparkling under the chandelier's light. She looked directly at Dominic, a look of adoration that felt utterly performative to Eleanor. The younger woman seemed to relish the attention, soaking it in like sunshine. Eleanor's internal voice screamed, a silent, desperate sound. She wanted to run, to hide, to simply cease to exist in that moment. Yet she stood her ground, her spine rigid, her chin held high. The delicate lace of her gown felt like a suffocating shroud, binding her to this public torture. She felt the warmth of the crowded room, the expensive perfumes, the clinking ice in glasses, all forming a surreal backdrop to her private agony. Dominic leaned in towards Serafina, whispering something that made her giggle, her hand lightly touching his arm. It was an intimate gesture designed to be seen, designed to wound. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She watched the way his fingers brushed Serafina's bare skin, a casual intimacy that spoke volumes. The unspoken contrast with his own distant, formal interactions with Eleanor was deafening. He had always kept a certain distance, a cool remove, even in their private moments. Now, in front of everyone, he paraded this open affection. He spoke again, his voice carrying easily through the quieted room. "Eleanor, as you all know, is a woman of deep thought, of profound intellect." The words were delivered with a mocking lightness, a patronizing tone that stripped them of any genuine praise. "She often loses herself in the great works, the complex theories." He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Sometimes one needs a little less cerebral companionship." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, careful and hesitant. Eleanor felt a hot flush creep up her neck, her cheeks burning. It was not just the insult, it was the public dissection of her very being, her identity, her value, or lack thereof in his eyes. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of memories and indignities. All the times he had belittled her interests, dismissed her opinions, called her too serious or cold. He used to say her mind was too sharp, her gaze too knowing. Now he used those same traits as weapons to carve her down, to justify his blatant disrespect. Her vision blurred for a moment, the crystal chandelier above seeming to splinter into 1,000 points of light. She squeezed her eyes for a millisecond, willing the tears away. Not here. Not now. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Serafina, on the other hand, Dominic continued, his voice oozing charm, brings a certain brightness, a youthful spirit that reminds one to live a little. He smiled down at the young woman, who preened under his gaze. She reminds me that life should not always be about grand strategies and weighty decisions. His words hung in the air, each one a barbed arrow aimed directly at Eleanor. The coldness he alluded to was a lie. It was his own emotional distance, his own inability to connect on a deeper level, that had created the chasm between them. He blamed her for his own failings. A wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. Her stomach churned, a bitter acid rising in her throat. She imagined the gossip that would spread through the city by morning, the snide remarks, the knowing glances. Eleanor Vance, the Don's wife, publicly discarded, replaced by a younger, prettier, less cerebral model. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making her feel small and insignificant. She felt a prickle behind her eyes, a familiar sensation when sorrow became too great to contain. Yet her face remained perfectly still, a testament to years of training in composure. She had always known he saw her as a possession, a status symbol, a beautiful and intelligent wife to complete his image. But she had believed, foolishly perhaps, that there was a foundation of respect, however fragile. Tonight he shattered that illusion into a million pieces, scattering them at her feet for all to see. The air in the ballroom felt thick, suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. She could hear the faint, nervous clinking of glasses from the periphery, the suppressed coughs, the shuffling of feet. Everyone was a witness to her public execution. Dominic's hand moved from Serafina's waist to her hand, gently lifting it. He gazed at her with an intensity that seemed almost genuine, or perhaps perfectly rehearsed. "She makes me feel alive again," he murmured, his voice lowered just enough to create an aura of intimacy, yet still audible to those closest. This was the deepest cut, the implication that Eleanor had somehow dulled his spirit, stifled his very being. Eleanor felt a searing anger ignite within her, a hot, unfamiliar flame that threatened to consume her carefully constructed facade. Alive again, as if she had ever tried to diminish him, rather than support him, advise him, even protect him from his own excesses. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She felt the tremor in her hands, though she kept them clasped discreetly in front of her. Her breathing grew shallow, ragged. This was it, the absolute breaking point. The years of silent endurance, the unspoken sacrifices, the quiet dignity she had striven to maintain. All of it was being publicly desecrated, reduced to nothing but a pathetic footnote in his grand display of power. She thought of her mother, who had always taught her to face adversity with grace, to never let anyone see her weakness. This teaching now felt like a curse, forcing her into a silent agony. Serafina glanced at Eleanor, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, a tiny victory dance in her eyes. It was a look of triumph, of blatant disregard that stoked the flames of Eleanor's fury. This young woman, a mere pawn in Dominic's game, dared to gloat. The injustice of it all, the sheer audacity of their performance, was almost unbearable. Eleanor remembered the cryptic message she had received, hinting at Dominic's vulnerabilities. A dangerous idea, cold and hard, began to form in the deepest recesses of her mind, a counter-strategy taking shape amidst the ruins of her pride. Dominic leaned in closer to Serafina, his dark head bent towards her blonde one. The murmur in the room grew slightly, a collective intake of breath, as if everyone anticipated the next inevitable act. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed, her eyes wide, but seeing nothing and everything at once. The world felt distant, muffled, as if she were observing it from behind a thick pane of glass. She saw the faces of the other guests, some averted, some openly curious, some with pity in their eyes. The pity was almost as unbearable as the scorn. She hated them for it. She hated Dominic more. He raised Serafina's hand slowly, deliberately, bringing it to his lips. He kissed the back of her hand, a lingering, intimate gesture that spoke of possession, of new beginnings, of a public shift in allegiance. The soft brush of his lips against Serafina's skin was a final, undeniable declaration. It was a gesture meant to sever any lingering threads of connection between him and Eleanor, to announce to the world that she was no longer his. The air left Eleanor's lungs in a silent whoosh. Then Dominic straightened, his eyes lifting, cutting through the glittering space between them. For a brief, devastating moment, his gaze met Eleanor's across the crowded ballroom. There was no apology, no regret, no trace of the man she had once married. Instead, his eyes held a triumphant, mocking glint, a cold, hard satisfaction. It was a look that declared his absolute power, his utter disregard for her feelings, his victory. That single mocking glance extinguished the last ember of her passive resistance, leaving behind only the cold, sharp clarity of a shattered heart and a burning, unyielding resolve. Dominic's mocking glint, a final, deliberate cruelty, shattered something deep inside Eleanor. It was not her composure which remained stubbornly intact. Instead, it broke a fundamental belief in her own quiet endurance. A tremor ran through her, subtle as a shadow unseen by the revelers. They turned back to the grotesque spectacle of Dominic and his new companion. The music swelled, a brassy, indifferent roar, mocking the sudden silence within her. Her breath caught in her throat, a physical ache as though she had swallowed a shard of ice. She felt a strange detachment, as if watching herself from afar. Her feet moved, guided by an instinct she did not fully comprehend. She walked away from the glittering, laughing crowd, faces blurred past her, a kaleidoscope of false smiles and avid curiosity. No one seemed to notice her departure. They were too engrossed in the new, shiny object Dominic presented. They were too captivated by his raw display of power. The air, heavy with jasmine and expensive champagne, now felt suffocating. Each step she took was deliberate, her posture rigid. It was a silent defiance against the swirling chaos of her heart. The vast ballroom, once her gilded cage, now felt like a stage she simply walked off, unnoticed, unmissed. The soft swish of her silk gown against her legs was the only sound she registered, a whisper of her retreat. She moved through the Castello's grand corridors, past tapestries of ancient battles. Gleaming suits of armor stood sentinel over centuries of Moretti power. The silence grew with every step she took, away from the party's pulsing heart. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as she reached the heavy oak door of her private study. The cold brass doorknob against her palm was a shock, a sudden anchor in the maelstrom of her mind. She pushed the door open. Its soft creak contrasted with the distant, muffled thrum of the celebration. The study enveloped her in its familiar scent of old paper, leather-bound books, and faint cedar. This room, her sanctuary, was where her intellect could breathe. Now, even here, the festive sounds seeped through the thick walls. They were a cruel, mocking reminder of the dignity she had just lost, the betrayal she had just endured. She closed the door behind her. Its soft click echoed in the sudden, profound quiet. Her gaze swept across the room, past the towering bookshelves, the antique globe, the velvet armchairs. Her eyes settled on her large mahogany desk, meticulously organized. It was a reflection of the order she always craved, an order now violently upended. The only light came from a single ornate desk lamp. It cast a warm, focused glow on a stack of economics journals. She moved towards it, her legs feeling strangely heavy, as if she were walking through deep water. Her reflection stared back from the polished surface of the desk, then from the dark glass of the window. The woman looking back was Eleanor Vance, yet she felt utterly transformed. Her hair, impeccably styled, was still perfect, her gown uncreased. Her face, however, told a different story. It was pale, almost translucent. Her hazel eyes, usually warm with intelligence, now held a chilling clarity. They were no longer the eyes of a woman resigned to her fate, nor consumed by despair. Something new had ignited there, a cold, unwavering flame. She saw the ghost of humiliation, a faint blush that still stained her cheeks. Beneath it, a nascent strength began to form. The sting of tears, held back with fierce determination, still burned behind her eyelids. They would not fall. Not now. Not ever again. She was past tears. She was past pleading. She was past the silent suffering that defined her existence within these gilded walls. A shudder ran through her, not of fear, but of a profound, chilling realization. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. Her gaze dropped to her left hand. The sapphire wedding ring still gleamed, a brilliant coal blue against her pale skin. It felt heavier than ever before. It was a shackle forged in Dominic's absolute control, a symbol of her imprisonment. For years she had worn it, a constant, weighty reminder of her vows and obligations. Now it felt like a brand, a mark of ownership publicly desecrated. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, reached for it. There was no hesitation, no sudden fit of rage. This was a deliberate act, born not of impulse but of a profound internal shift. She twisted the ring, slowly, feeling the smooth, cold platinum against her skin. The large, flawless sapphire seemed to mock her with its icy perfection. It was a jewel chosen by Dominic, a jewel that had bound her to him. Each rotation of the ring was a silent severing, a quiet declaration of freedom. She felt slight resistance as it slid over her knuckle. Then came the sudden, shocking lightness as it came free. The bare skin on her finger felt strangely cold, exposed, yet exhilaratingly free. Eleanor held the ring in her open palm, its weight pressed into her skin, a physical representation of years spent trapped. The sapphire caught the dim light of the lamp, throwing tiny, fractured blue reflections onto the polished wood of her desk. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but its beauty was tainted, poisoned by the memories it held. She looked at it, truly looked at it, not as love or commitment, but as a weapon, a tool, a pain. Now she was releasing it. With a measured, almost ritualistic movement, she placed the sapphire ring on the desk surface. She did not throw it. She did not cast it aside in anger. Instead, she set it down with quiet precision, directly beneath the lamp's beam. It lay there alone, gleaming, a solitary testament to a marriage that had just died, irrevocably, publicly, humiliatingly. Her eyes lingered on it for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. It was a goodbye, yes, but also a challenge, a promise. The faint, distant strains of music from the party continued to reach her. It was a ghostly echo of the celebration she had abandoned. The sound now fueled a cold, burning resolve within her, hardening the edges of her newly forged purpose. She looked away from the ring, her gaze sweeping across the familiar shelves. Her mind was already racing, calculating. Dominic had always underestimated her, seen her as little more than a beautiful ornament. He saw an intelligent but ultimately pliable accessory. He had made a profound mistake. The quiet hum of the study, usually a comfort, now felt charged with a new, dangerous energy. Eleanor knew what she had to do. The path ahead was treacherous, fraught with unimaginable risks, but the alternative was a slow, agonizing death of her spirit. She had chosen. The decision, though born of deep pain, brought with it an unsettling clarity. It was a fierce determination she had not known she possessed. She squared her shoulders, her posture straightening, a quiet warrior emerging from the ashes of her humiliation. Her eyes drifted to a small, discreet panel built into the side of her antique writing desk. It was a clever, almost invisible compartment, known only to her. With a practiced movement, her fingers found the hidden catch, pressing it firmly. A faint click, and the panel sprang open. It revealed a small, dark recess within the desk's sturdy frame. Inside, nestled amongst old, forgotten academic notes, lay a burner phone. It was sleek, black, nondescript, a ghost in the world of high-tech surveillance. She had acquired it months ago on a whim, a quiet act of rebellion. It was a small insurance policy against a future she had only vaguely anticipated. Her fingers reached in, brushing against the cool plastic of the phone. The device felt foreign, yet oddly familiar. It was a physical manifestation of the secret life she had always kept hidden beneath her perfectly composed exterior. She pulled it out. Its weight was light in her hand, a stark contrast to the sapphire ring now lying abandoned on the desk. The small screen glowed to life, a faint blue light illuminating her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the momentousness of her actions. She scrolled through the contacts. It was a list she had compiled with meticulous care. Each name represented a potential thread in the complex tapestry of the city's underworld. Most were coded, encrypted. But one stood out, not by its encryption, but by the sheer audacity of its presence there. It was a name she had often heard Dominic utter with contempt, a name synonymous with rivalry and danger. The name was Marcus Thorne. Her fingers hovered over it, a beat of hesitation, a deep, shuddering breath filling her lungs. This was it, the point of no return. The dangerous name, etched not just in her mind, but now a terrifying promise on the screen before her. The cheap plastic burner phone felt alien in Eleanor's manicured hand. It was a stark contrast to the sapphire ring that once adorned her finger. Her breath hitched in the opulent silence of her private study. This room, her sanctuary, felt like a gilded cage. Outside, Dominic's party thrummed, his laughter a cruel, distant symphony. Fingers trembling, she pressed the numbers memorized weeks ago, a silent prayer echoing in her mind. The line clicked. Marcus Thorne's low, resonant voice answered, devoid of surprise. "You are calling late," he stated, his tone smooth, almost conversational. Eleanor's throat tightened. His calm voice stole her breath. She cleared her throat, forcing composure. "My request is urgent," she replied, her voice a hushed whisper. A heavy silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. She felt his sharp gaze dissecting her words. Cold air from the window seeped in, raising goosebumps. "I have a matter to discuss," Eleanor continued, her words chosen carefully. "It concerns a mutual acquaintance, one who has overstepped decorum." She knew Thorne would understand. His network was vast, his intelligence keen. "Indeed," Thorne replied, a subtle shift in his voice, hinting at intrigue. "And what might this matter entail?" His question was a test of her resolve. Eleanor imagined his calculating eyes. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. "A proposition, a meeting at your chosen location, ensuring discretion and safety for both parties." Her pulse throbbed. This call was a leap into the abyss, severing every tie. "Safety for both parties," Thorne repeated, a low chuckle. "An interesting concern, Mrs. Moretti." The use of her husband's name stung. "My safety is paramount," she countered, her voice firm. "But so is our discussion's success." She had to show him she was a strategic player. Thorne paused, a deliberate, unnerving silence. The party sounds downstairs seemed to grow louder, mocking her solitude. Then he spoke, his voice crisp and clear. "There is an old, abandoned boathouse on the northern shore of Lakeview. It is 20 minutes past midnight. Be there alone, here." He gave precise directions, leading her far from the Moretti estate. The location was remote, isolated enough for privacy. 20 minutes past midnight, Eleanor affirmed, her heart hammering. "I will be there." The line went dead. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand still trembling. A wave of terrifying fear and exhilarating anticipation washed over her. The first step was taken. The bridge was burned. She had to move. She moved with quiet urgency, her movements precise, honed by years under Dominic's gaze. Her study held secrets. Behind a false panel in the antique desk, concealed by legal tomes, lay a small compartment. Her fingers worked the hidden latch, the faint click, barely audible. Inside, a cache awaited her. This was years of meticulous planning, a silent rebellion born from a decaying spirit. She pulled out a slim, leather folder. It contained copies of Dominic's sensitive financial documents, offshore accounts, shell corporations, and ledgers of illicit transactions. Each page rustled softly, carrying the scent of danger. These were Dominic's vulnerabilities, the raw nerves of his empire. She had painstakingly gathered them over years, never knowing if she would need them. Now that moment had arrived. Next, a small, discreet canvas pouch. Inside, bundles of crisp, high-denomination bills. This was her escape fund, accumulated from forgotten allowances and clever investments. It had slowly grown into a substantial stream. The cool money felt foreign yet reassuring, a tangible promise of independence. It represented freedom from her gilded cage. She savored its weight, a stark contrast to Dominic's jewels. Finally, she selected a small, nondescript leather handbag. Not her usual designer accessory, but a practical, durable piece. Into it, she carefully placed the documents and the money. Then a few personal items, not sentimental trinkets, instead practical necessities. A small, unused satellite phone, charged and ready, a spare set of reading glasses, a plain, dark scarf to obscure her face, and a single, elegant silver locket. The locket contained no pictures, only a tiny polished stone she had found on a beach years ago. It was a silent reminder of Eleanor Vance, not the woman Dominic had tried to mold. She changed out of her evening gown, shedding the heavy silk like a snake discarding its skin. She pulled on a simple dark wool dress, then a long, heavy coat. Its dark fabric was designed to blend into shadows. Her expensive shoes were replaced by flat, comfortable walking boots. Every choice was deliberate, selected for utility and anonymity. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back was different. Her eyes, usually veiled in polite resignation, now burned with fierce coal fire. Her long, dark brown hair, usually styled in an elegant bun, was quickly untied and left to fall loosely around her shoulders. This was a small act of rebellion. The distant sounds of the party had begun to wane. Guests were departing or retreating into smaller gatherings. This was her window. House staff would be preoccupied, guards less vigilant. She walked through the Castello's silent corridors, each step echoing slightly on the polished marble. The air, once heavy with expensive cigars, now carried a faint metallic tang of her own fear. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every painting to watch her. She navigated the sprawling estate with intimate knowledge. Years of confinement had taught her the secret passages, the rarely used service routes, the blind spots and security cameras. This house, her prison, was also her map to freedom. She moved like a phantom, her soft boots barely whispering against Persian rugs, then the cold stone of servant corridors. The scent of stale disinfectant in old wood replaced perfume. The air grew colder, damp with the chill of unheated sections. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her onward. Terror and exhilaration mixed, a sensation so potent it almost made her dizzy. One wrong step, one sound, and everything would be lost. She imagined Dominic's fury, his cold, calculating rage if he discovered her escape. The thought fueled her resolve. She would not be his prisoner any longer. She would not be an object displayed, insulted, then discarded. She reached the service exit, a heavy unmarked door at the far end of the kitchen pantry. It led to a narrow gravel path through cypress trees, meeting a secluded service road. The lock was old, rusty, rarely engaged. No one considered a prisoner might try to escape from the Castello. Eleanor produced a small oiled key she had acquired years ago, instinctively understanding its potential. The lock groaned in protest, a loud, grating sound in the night. Eleanor froze, breath catching, listening intently. Only rustling leaves and distant crickets answered. She twisted the key. With a soft click, the heavy bolt retracted. She pushed the door open just enough to slip through, her body tensing. The night air hit her face, a sharp, invigorating shock. It carried the scent of damp earth, pine and faint jasmine. Above, the sky was moonless, shrouded in thick clouds, offering perfect cover. She pulled the dark scarf over her head, obscuring her features. Gravel crunched softly under her boots. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of distant city lights. The imposing silhouette of the Castello loomed behind her, a dark shadow against the sky, its windows like vacant eyes. Its grandeur now seemed grotesque, a monument to her lost years. She walked quickly, purposefully, her small bag clutched tightly. Each step was a deliberate act of severance. Her heart continued its frantic beat. Stark terror and a burgeoning, intoxicating sense of freedom mingled. The air tasted cold and clean, unlike anything she had breathed within those suffocating walls. She did not look back. Nothing was left for her in that gilded prison. She was Eleanor Vance once more, not Mrs. Moretti. A woman reborn, forged in humiliation, armed with chilling resolve and a thirst for retribution. The gravel path met the service road, leading away into the unknown. She closed the heavy, creaking gate behind her, a final, definitive click against the vast silence. The iron bars felt cold beneath her gloved fingers. She could still feel the weight of Dominic's gaze, though he was miles away, likely still reveling. But his power now felt distant, almost unreal. She was out. She was free. A terrifying yet exhilarating liberation coursed through her veins, a stark contrast to the fear that still clung like a second skin. The journey had truly begun. The scent of expensive whiskey and a faint, sweet aroma of cherry pipe tobacco hung in the air. Jazz notes, smooth and low, drifted from a stage unseen, creating a sophisticated hum that vibrated through the plush velvet seats. Eleanor stepped into the velvet shadow, feeling the thrum of controlled energy. It was a stark contrast to the Castello's grand, echoing silence. This place breathed, alive with hushed conversations and the soft clink of ice against glass. Her breath caught in her throat, a mixture of trepidation and exhilarating possibility. A woman in a sharp black dress, her eyes calm and observant, met Eleanor just inside the entrance. She merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement, and gestured toward a discreet hallway. Eleanor followed, her heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet. Each step felt deliberate, carrying the weight of her past and the perilous uncertainty of her future. The muffled sounds of the club faded as they moved deeper into the building. She could feel the lingering tremor in her hands, a nervous ghost from the previous night's humiliation. But a steel resolve hardened her jaw. This was not a retreat. It was a strategic advance. The woman paused before an unmarked door, offering another silent gesture. Eleanor pushed it open. The room inside was dimly lit, bathed in the warm glow of a single brass lamp. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and a large, ornate desk dominated the space. Behind it sat Marcus Thorne. He rose as she entered, his presence immediately filling the room. His gaze was intense, unreadable, assessing her from the moment her foot crossed the threshold. He offered no greeting, no smile, only that piercing, intelligent stare. Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. She had faced worse eyes. "Mrs. Moretti," he finally said, his voice a smooth, low rumble that barely disturbed the quiet. He gestured to a leather armchair opposite his desk. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Eleanor took the seat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The leather felt cool against her skin. She allowed her eyes to meet his directly. He was even sharper up close, his features chiseled, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. It was a dangerous amusement, she thought. She knew she had to be impeccable, every word chosen with precision. Her very survival, her dignity, hinged on this performance. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she corrected him softly, a deliberate reclaiming of her identity. "The name Moretti is a temporary inconvenience." A flicker, perhaps of surprise, crossed his eyes, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A bold declaration, Mrs. Vance." "A necessary one," she replied, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "I believe we share a mutual interest, Mr. Thorne." He raised an eyebrow, a silent invitation to elaborate. The air in the room seemed to thicken, every unspoken word hanging in the space between them. Eleanor could taste the metallic tang of her own anticipation, mingled with a faint whisper of fear. She pushed the fear down, deep into the recesses of her mind, letting only clarity and purpose rise. Her entire life had been a series of controlled negotiations, but none with stakes so high. "Dominic Moretti," she began, his name a bitter taste on her tongue, "is a man who values control above all else. His empire, his reputation, his public image, these are his vulnerabilities." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching his reaction. His expression remained neutral, but the intensity of his gaze never wavered. "And you believe you know these vulnerabilities better than anyone?" he asked, his tone level, challenging. "I have been inside his world for years," Eleanor affirmed, her voice steady. "I have observed its inner workings, its intricate network of loyalties and betrayals. I have seen the seams, the places where the fabric is weakest." She thought of the countless dinners, the hushed conversations, the financial ledgers she had glimpsed, the names and numbers she had filed away in her formidable memory. Dominic had dismissed her as merely ornamental, but she had been a silent, calculating witness. Details, Mrs. Vance, Thorne prompted, a slight incline of his head. Details are what matter in these situations. Indeed, she agreed, allowing herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. I can provide you with detailed insight into his financial operations, his illicit dealings, and the true extent of his network. I know his hidden assets, his offshore accounts, and the names of those who are truly loyal and those who could be swayed. She pictured the mental map she had meticulously constructed over years, a map of Dominic's empire, its strengths, and more importantly, its fatal flaws. The memories of her humiliation, of Serafina's smug face, of Dominic's mocking eyes, fueled her resolve. This is not a simple game, Eleanor, Thorne said, using her first name for the first time, a subtle shift in their dynamic. Dominic Moretti is a dangerous man. What you are proposing carries immense risk. I am acutely aware of the risks, Mr. Thorne, she replied, her gaze firm. I have just walked away from a life that offered me only a gilded cage and public humiliation. I have nothing left to lose but my dignity, and I intend to reclaim it. She thought of the sapphire ring left behind on Dominic's desk, a powerful symbol of her emancipation. She would never wear it again. And what do you seek in return for this invaluable inside knowledge? Thorne questioned, his eyes narrowing slightly. Protection, I assume. A safe harbor. More than just protection, Eleanor clarified, leaning forward slightly in her chair, her voice resonating with an undercurrent of fierce determination. I seek assistance in his downfall, a strategic alliance. I want to see his empire crumble, his control shattered, his reputation destroyed. I want him to know the full cost of his arrogance and cruelty. The words, spoken aloud, felt like a release, a surge of adrenaline igniting a dormant fire within her. Her heart pounded a steady rhythm against her ribs. Thorne remained silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, a thorough examination of her resolve, her intelligence, her potential usefulness. He was looking for a crack, a sign of weakness, but she offered him none. She had honed her composure over years of living under Dominic's oppressive gaze. Every breath she took was a testament to her calculated defiance. Dominic is not a man who forgives betrayal easily, Thorne mused, almost to himself, especially from those he believes he owns. He will learn that he owned nothing but an illusion, Eleanor countered, her voice sharp with conviction. I was never truly his. He made that clear himself, in front of everyone. The sting of that memory was still fresh, raw, but it was now a weapon, not a wound. It propelled her forward, gave her strength. This alliance would be mutually beneficial, she continued, laying out her case with the precision of a seasoned strategist. You seek to expand your influence to remove a formidable rival. I can give you the blueprint, the weak points, the hidden levers. Together, we can dismantle his entire operation. She knew his ambitions. She had studied them, just as she had studied Dominic's weaknesses. This was not merely revenge. It was a calculated business proposal. Thorne leaned back again, a faint smile beginning to play on his lips, a slow, predatory curve that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. It was not a comforting smile, but it was a sign of recognition, of understanding. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the steel in her voice, and he appreciated it. He ran a hand over his chin, his gaze still fixed on her. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant, muted jazz. You are a bold woman, Eleanor Vance, he said at last, his voice a soft murmur that somehow commanded the entire space. He held her gaze for another long moment, a silent negotiation passing between them, a dangerous understanding. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he extended his hand across the desk, a silent, powerful agreement passing between them, an alliance forged in the shadows of their shared enemy. The air in the secluded room still hummed with the silent accord, Marcus Thorne's hand firm in hers for a beat longer than necessary. Eleanor did not waver. She released his grip, moving with an abruptness born of urgent purpose. From a satchel resting beside the chair, she extracted a stack of slim, leather-bound notebooks and a USB drive. placing them precisely on the polished mahogany table between them. The faint scent of aged paper mingled with the crisp, clean smell of new technology. Dominic's empire is a house of cards, intricately built but fundamentally unstable, she began, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor that had haunted her for years. She pushed one notebook across the table. These are the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the ones he thought only his most trusted lieutenants knew about. Marcus picked it up, his gaze flicking from the neat, precise handwriting to Eleanor's composed face. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features, perhaps surprise, perhaps dawning respect. She pointed to the USB. This contains encrypted ledgers, transaction records, and the names of every single recipient in his illicit money laundering network. I spent years gathering it, digitizing everything when he was away. The thought of those endless nights, hunched over a hidden laptop, the quiet click of keys echoing in the vast, empty mansion, sent a phantom ache through her shoulders. She had been preparing, unknowingly, for this exact moment. The silent resistance had become a weapon. Marcus plugged the drive into a sleek tablet he produced from within his jacket. His fingers moved swiftly, expertly navigating the encrypted files. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face, revealing a sharp, focused intensity. He scrolled through pages of data, his eyebrows rising fractionally at the sheer volume and detail. The numbers, the dates, the names. It was a tapestry of deceit woven with cold precision. "This is more than just information, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper of admiration. "This is his lifeblood." Eleanor felt a surge of vindication. This was her currency, her leverage. "His lifeblood is also his greatest vulnerability," she countered, her eyes hard. "He overextended, believing himself untouchable. He funneled profits from legitimate businesses into these illicit ventures, blurring the lines, exposing everything. She had seen the anxiety in his eyes during late-night calls, the subtle signs of stress that no one else dared to acknowledge. She had simply recorded them. Next, she presented a diagram detailing Dominic's key personnel. These are his inner circle. Thomas, his consigliere, is fiercely loyal, but his daughter is facing mounting medical bills for a rare illness. A quiet offer of support could sway his conscience, or at least compromise his focus. She traced a line on the diagram with her finger. Sarah, his chief financial officer, is brilliant but deeply resentful. She feels undervalued, constantly undermined by Dominic's volatile temper. She has access to everything but too much fear to act. Marcus leaned back, listening, his eyes never leaving her face. He absorbed every nuance, every subtle observation. Eleanor spoke of long-held grudges within Dominic's ranks, of unspoken ambitions, of quiet disloyalties simmering beneath the surface of enforced obedience. She recounted conversations she had merely overheard, dismissive remarks Dominic made about his associates, and the subtle ways those slights had festered. She had been a ghost in her own home, listening, learning, remembering. Then came the hidden assets. He has a villa in Tuscany, purchased under a false name, completely off the books, and a collection of Renaissance art acquired through dubious channels, stored in a private vault beneath his family's oldest vineyard. She described specific pieces, their approximate values, the dates of their acquisition, even the names of the intermediaries. Marcus's expression shifted again, a slow, knowing smile beginning to form. "You've been busy, Eleanor." "I had time," she replied simply, the weight of those empty years now distilled into potent knowledge. Each piece of information was a carefully placed brick, building a path toward his inevitable collapse. Her own suffering had sharpened her perception, honed her memory. She knew the secret language of his empire better than he did. For weeks, the secluded rooms of the Velvet Shadow became their war room. The scent of strong coffee and printer ink filled the air. Whiteboards, once pristine, were soon covered in intricate flowcharts and timelines, connecting Dominic's legitimate enterprises to his shadowy dealings. They meticulously dissected every possible avenue of attack. Marcus brought his own network, his own strategic brilliance, to meet Eleanor's unparalleled insight. Their discussions were intense, often lasting late into the night. Eleanor found herself arguing points of economic strategy, debating legal loopholes and predicting Dominic's reactions with chilling accuracy. Her mind, long confined to the pleasantries of society, now soared, unfettered and sharp. It felt like breathing again, a deep, cleansing breath after years of suffocating silence. She had forgotten the sheer exhilaration of intellectual combat, the thrill of her thoughts being taken seriously. Marcus challenged her, pushing her to refine her arguments, to anticipate countermoves. He watched her, a subtle admiration growing in his eyes as she proved herself not just a repository of secrets, but a formidable strategist in her own right. He saw the fire that had been banked for so long, now burning brightly, fueled by a glacial calm. She was not merely a pawn, she was a queen, moving her pieces with deadly precision. We hit him on multiple fronts, Marcus explained one evening, tracing a finger across a complex diagram. Financial, legal, public perception. We squeezed the legitimate, exposed the illicit. We undermined his loyalty, sowed distrust among his ranks. Eleanor nodded, adding, his greatest pride is his image of unassailable power. We shatter that. We strip him of his reputation, then his wealth, then his control. The words tasted like cold steel on her tongue, but she felt no remorse, only a deep, righteous purpose. Eleanor insisted on taking an active role. I will not simply provide information and wait, she stated, her voice firm. I will be there every step of the way. Marcus studied her for a long moment, assessing the steely resolve in her eyes. He saw not a fragile former wife, but a woman forged in fire. He saw an asset, an undeniable force. He agreed. Under Thorne's guidance, Eleanor began a regimen of profound self-improvement. Her days were now a structured dance of strategy sessions, rigorous research, and physical training. She devoured books on corporate law, international finance, and the psychology of power. She learned to decipher complex financial statements with speed, to identify anomalies that would have once seemed invisible. Her mind, always keen, became a precision instrument. Her body, too, began its own transformation. Marcus arranged for a private instructor, a quiet, disciplined woman named Chloe, to teach Eleanor self-defense. In the sleek, minimalist training room of the Velvet Shadow, Eleanor learned to move with purpose. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by fluid motion and growing strength. Her muscles, once soft from a life of sedentary elegance, began to harden, to remember a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The sting of her bruises, the ache in her limbs, were welcome sensations. They were proof of her agency, a physical manifestation of her rebirth. She learned to block, to strike, to use an opponent's momentum against them. Chloe taught her focus, how to channel her anger into controlled power, how to remain calm even when pushed to her limits. Eleanor found a primal satisfaction in the thud of her fist against a padded target, in the swift, decisive movements that could neutralize a threat. She also learned to handle a weapon, not for aggression, but for self-preservation. The cool, balanced weight of a small handgun in her palm was initially unsettling. But as Chloe patiently guided her, teaching her grip, stance, and aiming, Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. It was not about violence, but about control, about knowing she had the means to protect herself, to ensure her survival. The metallic scent of gunpowder was a new, stark reality. Her reflection in the mirror began to show a different woman. The elegant, refined posture remained, but now it was imbued with a quiet power. Her eyes, once shadowed by pain, now held a cold, determined glint. The meticulous grooming remained, but beneath the impeccable surface lay a core of tempered steel. She carried herself with an unspoken authority, a quiet confidence that radiated from within. The ghost of the old Eleanor, the one who endured in silence, had finally been exorcised. She felt a strange sense of liberation, a fierce joy in this new strength. The tears she had shed on her birthday were now transmuted into an unwavering resolve. This was not just revenge, it was a reclamation, a taking back of her dignity, her autonomy, her very self. Dominic had sought to crush her, to make her an object. Instead, he had forged a weapon. One evening, Marcus laid out a large, detailed map of the city and its surrounding territories on the table. It was a complex web of influence, properties, and known operational zones. Eleanor leaned over it, her gaze sweeping across the familiar landmarks and the hidden enclaves. Her finger, now scarred with a small, barely visible callus from her training, traced a precise path. It moved across the sprawling estate of the Castello, then to a warehouse district, a downtown financial building, a quiet suburban safe house. Each point represented a carefully planned strike. Each movement of her finger was a step toward a calculated destruction, a dismantling, piece by agonizing piece. A cold, determined glint reflected in her deep hazel eyes, illuminating the woman she had become. The acrid smell of burnt coffee hung heavy in Dominic Moretti's private study, mingling with the stale scent of cigar smoke and a cold, metallic hint of fear. Papers lay scattered across the polished mahogany desk, some crumpled into angry wads, others stained with spilled whiskey. His usually immaculate dark hair was disheveled, a stark contrast to the sharp, tailored suits he always favored. The phone on his desk, an expensive antique rotary model he kept purely for aesthetics, rang with a relentless, jarring insistence, each peal a fresh stab at his already frayed nerves. His right hand, trembling slightly, reached for another glass, the ice clinking loudly in the sudden silence of a missed call. Dominic felt a raw, primal panic clawing at his throat. For weeks now, the blows had been relentless, precise, and utterly devastating. A key shell corporation, deep within the labyrinth of his offshore accounts, had been exposed, its assets frozen. A crucial shipment, routing through a supposedly impregnable network, had vanished, leaving only a cryptic message about its ultimate destination. Then came the intel leak, details of a new, highly profitable venture which evaporated overnight, snatched by a rival before he could even secure it. Each setback was a masterpiece of sabotage, hitting him where he was weakest, revealing vulnerabilities he believed only he and one other could possibly know. His mind raced, a furious, desperate whirl. He had interrogated every man, every contact, every whisper he could find. Loyalties were questioned, allegiances tested, but every path led to a dead end. Yet the attacks continued, systematic and clinical, slowly bleeding his empire dry. He slammed his fist on the desk, the heavy wood groaning under the impact. A vein pulsed visibly in his temple, a testament to the internal storm raging within him. He remembered Eleanor's sharp mind, her uncanny ability to dissect complex financial statements, her quiet observations that he had always dismissed as mere intellectual musings. A chilling thought, cold and unwelcome, began to form in the recesses of his mind. Could it be her? The notion was absurd, unthinkable. She was his wife, his property, a decorative ornament confined to the Castello. Yet the precision of these attacks, the intimate knowledge they displayed, whispered her name. He gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, a sickening dread coiling in his gut. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize, to blame some hidden enemy, but the pieces fit too perfectly. Only Eleanor knew the exact convoluted path of funds through his various front companies. Only she had seen the subtle weaknesses in the security protocols for his most sensitive data. Only she had been privy to his casual boasts about future expansions, the very plans now being systematically dismantled. He remembered her hazel eyes, always so discerning, always watching, even when she appeared to be lost in thought or simply smiling politely. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He had underestimated her, had seen her as nothing more than an educated appendage. The thought was a bitter taste in his mouth, a flavor of betrayal he never anticipated. He felt a sudden, profound vertigo, the world spinning around him, as if the very foundations of his power were crumbling beneath his feet. The constant ringing of his private line, usually a symbol of his omnipresence, now sounded like a death knell. Days turned into a week of constant pressure, each sunrise bringing new, devastating news of lost territory or crippled operations. Dominic aged visibly, the lines around his eyes deepening, his once imperious posture beginning to stoop. The whispers in the city grew louder, rumors of his impending downfall, of a new power rising. He knew what these whispers meant. They meant a challenge to his authority, a sign of weakness that his rivals would exploit without mercy. He had to attend the inter-family meeting, called by the city's elders, a council meant to maintain balance, but truly a tribunal when one of their own faltered. He knew he was walking into a lion's den, but to refuse would be to admit defeat before the battle began. He dressed in his finest suit, a dark charcoal, hoping it would project an image of control he no longer felt. The silk tie felt like a noose around his neck. The meeting hall was a space of old power, heavy with history and unspoken threats. Located in a discreet building downtown, it was designed to intimidate, its high ceilings and dark wood paneling absorbing light and sound. The air hung thick with the scent of aged whiskey and the metallic tang of unspoken tension. Faces, familiar and stern, turned towards Dominic as he entered, their gazes assessing, calculating, utterly devoid of sympathy. He could feel the weight of their judgment, a collective pressure pressing down on him. The soft murmur of conversation died as he took his seat at the long polished table, a chair that suddenly felt cold beneath him. He tried to project an air of calm, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened again. A hush fell over the room, deeper and more profound than before. Marcus Thorne entered, his presence a calm, controlled force, like a predator confident in its domain. By his side, standing with a poise that belied any form of vulnerability, was Eleanor Vance. Her deep hazel eyes, once shadowed with quiet sorrow, now gleamed with an unnerving clarity. She wore a tailored suit of a deep, rich sapphire blue, a color that made her eyes appear almost luminous. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun, highlighting the sharp angles of her jaw. There was no tremor in her step, no hesitation in her gaze. She was a woman utterly transformed, radiating a quiet, formidable power that silenced every man in the room. Dominic felt a punch to his gut, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. He stared at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the elegant, confident woman before him with the docile, academic wife he had known. Her presence was a direct assault, an unforgivable act of defiance. His rage flared, hot and consuming. But beneath it, a cold fear began to seep into his bones. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that his chilling suspicion had been correct. She was the architect of his ruin. The realization was both devastating and infuriating. He tried to speak, but his throat felt constricted, words catching like thorns. Eleanor met his gaze, her expression unreadable, a cool, unwavering stare that held no trace of past affection, only a steely resolve. A fleeting memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed through Dominic's mind. Eleanor in her wedding gown, her eyes wide with a hope he had systematically crushed. He quickly banished it. He saw Marcus Thorne offer her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of respect and partnership that further inflamed Dominic's fury. The unspoken message was clear. She was no longer merely Marcus's ally. She was a force in her own right, standing equal. The meeting began with a dry recitation of recent losses, each one a nail in Dominic's coffin. He listened, his jaw clenched, as the elders spoke of his dwindling influence, his compromised resources, the unprecedented instability rocking his sector. He tried to interject, to defend, but his voice lacked its usual authority, cracking under the strain. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of their judgment, a palpable pressure that made his head pound. He knew they were merely waiting for the final damning blow, for the moment he would be utterly stripped of his power. Then Eleanor stepped forward, her movement fluid and purposeful. The soft rustle of her suit was the only sound in the room. She stood directly opposite Dominic, across the woodinai polished table. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and resonant, cutting through the oppressive silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She did not raise her voice, did not falter, but each word carried an undeniable weight, an authority that commanded attention. "Gentlemen," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled men, "we are here to discuss the stability of the city and the unfortunate actions of one who has jeopardized it." Her eyes finally settled on Dominic, holding his gaze without flinching. Dominic Moretti has not only mismanaged his affairs, but he has done so through a series of corrupt dealings that betray the trust of this council and every family represented here. She began to lay out the evidence, not in vague accusations, but with meticulous detail. She cited specific dates, account numbers, in names of shell corporations, revealing an intricate web of embezzlement and illicit transfers that siphoned funds from joint ventures. She spoke of how Dominic had leveraged shared resources for personal gain, sacrificing the stability of the broader network for his own short-sighted ambitions. She described his secret dealings with rival factions, selling information and undermining long-standing agreements for a quick profit, all to the detriment of everyone else in the room. Dominic felt his face flush with a combination of rage and disbelief. How could she know such things? These were his deepest, darkest secrets, carefully guarded, meticulously hidden. The murmurs around the table grew, turning into angry whispers. The faces of the elders, once merely stern, now twisted with indignation. He saw their trust eroding, replaced by raw anger and betrayal. He watched his reputation, the very foundation of his power, crumble before his eyes. He tried to rise, to shout, to deny, but Marcus Thorne placed a hand gently, almost imperceptibly, on his shoulder, a silent warning that froze him in his seat. Eleanor continued, her narrative flowing seamlessly, building an undeniable case against her husband. She revealed how Dominic had systematically undervalued assets to defraud partners, inflated expenses, and manipulated data to hide his illicit gains. She detailed the precise methods he used to launder money, the names of the banks, the dates of the transactions, the specific codes. Her words were like hammer blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy. The men around the table exchanged horrified glances, their faces pale with shock and outrage. They had suspected corruption, but not this level of calculated deceit. And beyond his financial corruption, Eleanor stated, her voice dropping slightly, Dominic Moretti has shown a profound disrespect for the very institutions that govern our lives, including the sanctity of his own family. She paused, letting her words hang in the air, creating a palpable tension. Dominic felt a cold dread, knowing what was coming next. He gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles aching. He publicly shamed his wife, at her own birthday celebration, flaunting his mistress for all to see. Her eyes flickered toward Dominic, a woman, Serafina, who now stands in the hallway ready to confirm these facts. The doors to the meeting room slowly opened, revealing Serafina, her face pale and tear-streaked, flanked by two of Marcus Thorne's silent, imposing men. She looked terrified, bewildered, a deer caught in headlights. The air crackled with shock. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The men, who had been enraged by financial betrayal, were now utterly aghast by this public display of domestic dishonor. To betray business was one thing, to publicly degrade his wife, and then to have it laid bare in front of their peers, was an unforgivable sin in their world, a sign of uncontrolled ego and dangerous instability. Dominic's face was a mask of utter humiliation, his eyes darting between Eleanor, Serafina, and the horrified faces of the council members. He had built his life on reputation, on control, and now both were being systematically torn apart by the very woman he had scorned. He felt a profound sense of paralysis, his body rigid with impotent fury. Eleanor watched his unraveling, a flicker of something almost akin to pity, quickly extinguished by the cold satisfaction of justice. This was not about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about exposing the rot beneath the gilded facade. She felt her heart beat a steady rhythm, strong and unwavering, a stark contrast to the frantic pulse that once haunted her. The room was silent, save for Serafina's quiet sobs from the doorway. Therefore, Eleanor continued, her voice firm and resolute, I formally declare my intention to divorce Dominic Moretti. She reached into a small velvet pouch she carried, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Her fingers closed around a familiar, heavy object. The cold, smooth surface of the sapphire wedding ring met her touch. It felt like a stone, devoid of any warmth, any connection. This ring, once a symbol of her entrapment, was now her instrument of liberation. With unwavering composure, she lifted the massive, intricately designed platinum ring, featuring its large, flawless sapphire surrounded by diamonds. The facets caught the subdued light of the room, casting brief, glittering reflections on the somber faces. It was a beautiful, devastatingly expensive piece, a testament to Dominic's wealth, and her years of gilded imprisonment. She held it for a moment, letting its weight settle in her palm, feeling the last vestiges of its power over her dissipate into the heavy air. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible click, she placed the ring precisely in the center of the polished table, directly between herself and Dominic. The sapphire, cold and blue, seemed to stare up at him, a silent, damning accusation. The sound of its placement echoed in the stunned silence of the room, a small yet profoundly definitive declaration. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a lifetime of sorrow, a past she was finally severing. Dominic stared at the ring, then at Eleanor, then back at the ring. His eyes were wide with a mixture of shock, despair, and utter defeat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face, leaving it ashen and slack. The powerful Don, once so feared, so untouchable, was now a broken man, stripped bare of his power, his reputation, and his control, all by the woman he had dismissed as insignificant. The men around the table averted their gazes, unable to witness the absolute collapse of one of their own. The air was thick with the scent of his downfall. Eleanor felt a deep, cleansing breath fill her lungs, a lightness she had not known in years. The heavy weight that had pressed down on her soul for so long had finally lifted. She had faced her tormentor, exposed his depravity, and publicly reclaimed her autonomy. Her work was done. She turned her back to Dominic in the shattered remnants of his world and walked toward the open doors. She did not look back, not even for a fleeting second. Marcus Thorne met her at the threshold, offering a brief, almost imperceptible smile, a silent acknowledgement of her triumph. She stepped out of the oppressive building and into the bustling morning street. The sun, a brilliant disk of gold, was just rising above the city's skyline, painting the towering buildings in hues of orange and pink. A gentle breeze, cool and fresh, brushed against her face, carrying with it the sense of possibility and a brand new day. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, the everyday symphony of a city awakening. The world stretched out before her, vast and unpredictable, no longer a cage but an open landscape, filled with both danger and endless opportunities. This was a world she would now shape on her own terms, with her own hand. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.